Jerusalem. For Christians, the most important events in history took place here. The Bible says this is the city where Jesus lived his last days and was crucified. What happened here changed the world. Over 2,000 years, the city too has changed. Destroyed and reconstructed more than 20 times in as many centuries. Only fragments, traces, and ruins remain of the Jerusalem that Jesus would have known. Now, building on decades of research with state-of-the-art 3D graphic modeling, we can reveal what it would have looked like to him. The streets and gateways through which he would have walked. The complex water system which kept this desert city from thirst. The pools where some say Jesus performed miracles. The temple complex, the heart of the city and of the Jewish faith, where Jesus taught and prayed. An extraordinary piece of engineering that was razed to the ground almost as soon as it was completed. We will reveal the lost world of the Gospels, Jesus, Jerusalem. In Jesus' time, Jerusalem was the heart of Judea, the kingdom of the Jews, a people defined by their religion. To them, this was the most important place in the world. The Gospels describe 3 different occasions when Jesus came to this city. 40 days after his birth, when his parents presented him to the priests in the temple. at the age of 12 when he came to teach, and for the last week of his life. He entered the city walls in triumph and then left them to die on a cross.
Jerusalem in the first century is the center of everything for the Judean world. There's a strong contrast between where Jesus has come from and the Jerusalem to which he arrives.
His hometown was Nazareth, a small settlement 75 miles to the north. Nazareth had a reputation for being rough and uncivilized. It could not have been more different from Jerusalem.
He comes from the country, and now he's coming to the city. If we imagine Jesus coming to Jerusalem for the first time, he must have been absolutely awestruck by this structure which is enormous relative to everything around it.
This structure is the Temple Mount. For investigators trying to piece together what this city looked like in the first century, it presents a unique challenge. Most of what was built here has been lost to time, destroyed within decades of Jesus' death by a rampaging Roman army. And because this site is sacred to three of the world's great religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, no excavations have been allowed here for more than 150 years. Nevertheless, through detective work and the study of ancient records, it is now possible to rebuild the Temple Mount as Jesus knew it and uncover the secrets of its construction. It was the brainchild of Herod the Great, king of Judea at the time of Jesus' birth. Herod's achievements will always be overshadowed by what is written about him in the Bible. That he ordered the slaughter of newborn babies, that he tried to murder the infant Christ.
Herod generally gets a bad rap in history. Herod was an extraordinarily skilled administrator. He was also a visionary builder, not just what he did to aggrandize the temple and the Temple Mount. He built this extraordinary fortress at Masada. He built this extraordinary palace complex at Herodian. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be Herod the Great.
And so the world that Jesus lived in was one molded by his would-be killer. In around 15 BC, Herod had embarked on a plan to build a new temple complex, far more grand than what already stood there. He would triple the size of the existing structure to make it cover an area equivalent of 25 football fields. He would surround it with huge walls. But he faced two major engineering challenges. Firstly, in Jewish thinking, there was only one possible location for the temple. He would have to demolish the existing structure, and the priests didn't trust him. They didn't believe he'd finish the job. To prove his good intentions, every stone needed for the new building would be quarried before work began on the site. 1 million tons of stone from sites all around the city. It took 8 years. A still greater challenge was that the summit of the Temple Mount was a peak, not a plateau. More than that, it was simply too small for Herod's plans. Herod arrived at a simple but extraordinarily ambitious solution. He made the mountain bigger. The Temple Mount that Jesus knew was in fact the largest man-made structure on earth. The floor of the plaza, which would hold up to 250,000 people, was effectively a roof. It covered a network of chambers.
If we look at the Temple Mount today, we see a flat, huge area, which is all leveled. But in matter of fact, it is all artificially built. There is a mountain hidden at the very center, and the mountain looked like that, and what was added is a hanging floor going all the way here, and the walls around here, the retaining walls, support it. How one hang a floor like that? By supporting it with a lot of arches, walls below.
In the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount, there are 4 levels of arches making vaulted rooms. Each arch is 20 feet wide and 20 feet high. The technique of arch building is well known in Herod's time. The Romans use it extensively. What's different here is that Herod's men used not concrete, but the local limestone. The result was a perfectly executed piece of engineering with 3 major advantages. It was strong enough to carry the weight of tens of thousands of pilgrims. It was long-lasting.
It helped it to last almost forever. We are now looking at the building 2,000 years later, and it is still here, and strong and very impressive.
It was also light. If Herod had tried the alternative, to simply fill this space with earth or rubble, the weight on the retaining walls would have been far too great. They would have had to have been made even thicker, or they would have collapsed. As it was, the walls that surrounded the Temple Mount were vast. They were 15 feet thick, and rising above the plaza, they stood more than 120 feet high. They were made from hand-carved stone blocks.
The Temple Mount is about a mile in circumference. So we can say that a single layer of stone would be, let's say, 800 to 1,000 pieces.
On average, each of these stones weighed around 9,000 pounds, roughly the weight of a full-grown elephant. Some were much bigger. Archaeologists have located the largest of the blocks used in the Temple Mount's construction. It can be found in what are called the rabbinical tunnels. Now buried by 2,000 years of progress and change, in Jesus' time it was in plain view at street level. Dr. Jody Magnus is a world expert on the architecture of Jesus Jerusalem.
This very large stone is part of what's called the master course. The idea was to stabilize the Temple Mount by incorporating a row of stones that are much bigger, taller, and heavier than all of the other stones.
Its size is hard to comprehend. It is 20 times larger than the largest stone used in the building of Egypt's pyramids.
It's over 40 feet long, 10 feet high, and weighs over 400 tons.
Jesus or any other visitor to Jerusalem would have been confronted by a building of vast, intimidating scale. And Herod's builders took this into account with a trick of enormous skill.
Each row of stones, as you work your way up, is slightly set back, slightly offset from the one below. This, first of all, gives a stability to the lower parts of the walls necessary to carry the weight above, and it also creates, or I should say corrects, an optical illusion. If the stones had been laid flush, perfectly straight one above the other, the building is so monumental that when you looked at it, it would have seemed to have been leaning over, it would have seemed to have been top heavy. So this actually makes it look as if the wall rises straight.
The stonemasons were so skilled that the fit between the stones was almost airtight. Shimon Gibson demonstrates their expertise.
They were able to fit the stones close together. The stonemasons were so precise that if I tried to put this sort of $50 bill in here, I could just get it in. But that's about it, nothing else.
This section of the wall has stood for 2,000 years, but engineers relied on craftsmanship, not mortar, to hold the blocks together. "18,000 people were employed in building these walls. Work began 15 years before Jesus' birth. It was still going on 80 years later. The complex as Jesus knew it was the world's biggest construction site. But we can now create what it looked like on completion, the largest structure on Earth. It stood for only 5 years before a brutal Roman army tore it down. According to the Gospel of St. Mark, Jesus is said to have pointed to the structures on Jerusalem's Temple Mount and said, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be one stone left upon another that will not be thrown down." 40 years later, these words were proved to be prophetic. The Roman army, suppressing a Jewish revolt, destroyed the temple. The result for modern investigators is one of the most tantalizing challenges of biblical archaeology: to recreate the Holy Temple as it stood in the middle of the Temple Mount. It has taken the work of generations of scientists and scholars to build a picture of what Jesus would have seen when he came here. On entering the Temple Mount, he would move upwards through a series of courts or open spaces. He would pass a sign written in Greek warning all foreigners, meaning non-Jews, that if they passed beyond a certain point, they would be put to death. Then he would be in the Court of the Women, the last place where women were allowed. This was the outer court of the temple proper, or sanctuary. At the top of 15 semicircular steps was the beautiful gate leading to the court of the Israelites, and opened only to ritually purified Jewish males.
Jesus would not be able to go beyond that point because within the temple itself, only the priesthood entered. And the Holy of Holies at the back of the temple, only the high priest entered, and only once on the Day of Atonement per year.
Piecing together the evidence from written sources, it's possible to establish what the exterior of this jealously guarded sanctuary looked like. Archaeologists have calculated the height of the temple sanctuary compared to the structure that stands there now, the Muslim Dome of the Rock.
The wonderful Islamic building there is exactly half the height of the temple at Herod and Jesus' time.
So this cavernous structure was the height of a 15-story office block. Our investigators want to know how the temple's builders managed to erect such a building with only the very primitive tools and lifting devices available in Jesus' time. It's clear that it would have required vast manpower. The accounts say that since every stone of the building was to be regarded as holy, 1,000 priests were trained as stonemasons. Dr. Guy Steibel believes he can identify evidence of their quarries.
One of the exciting things is that this cave preserved so freshly.
In an underground cavern 2 miles from Jerusalem, he has found a series of chisel marks. They match the exact shape of the stones used to build Herod's Temple Mount.
And what you can see here very clearly, you can see a line horizontally here, and another line goes down here, and you can see the edge of it. Basically, they would use sort of pickaxe, cutting grooves, and then using a crowbar to lever or to detach the stone block from the cave itself, from the wall of the cave, and remove it.
Some of these tools are still being used today. But in Jesus' time, the workers didn't have access to trucks or earth movers.
You can see very clearly that from the chiseling mark, this is a fairly neat straight line. Once it was removed, you can shape it exactly to the measurement that was required by your architect. And you wish to do it here, because then you have to schlep it, to carry it all the way, whether to the Temple Mount or to another area of construction. If you reduce the waste and all the things that you won't need later on, you have less weight to carry. So they were very, very practical.
Transportation required a combination of brute force and innovative engineering. Archaeologist Dr. Ronnie Reich has recreated one solution that the builders used. It's called a metagenes. It's a simple but effective system. The stone block becomes an axle between 2 wheels.
10 men could roll it to and fro. Each one of them actually moved 900 pounds of stone. And this is, of course, a burden that a single person cannot do by himself.
Good
So
is Jesus.
with this device, that stone was moved.
When the stones had been delivered to the site, they still had to be maneuvered into place. On average, each one weighed at least 10 tons. Simple cranes were used to lift them.
Here we have constructed a bipod with ropes and pulleys, and the ropes can be pulled with levers. With 8 people working, we could lift the stone 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters high, and then let it down easily.
The end result would certainly have been magnificent. But one aspect of the temple's construction has always proved mysterious. The writer Josephus says that the temple was covered in marble and gold, and that from a distance it looked like a snow-capped mountain glittering in the sun. Some modern investigators find this hard to believe.
And the reason is there's no marble in Israel, in ancient Palestine. It doesn't exist. It all has to be imported from other places like Turkey and Greece. And we have very, very little marble imported to this country in the time of Jesus. It's not until later that marble starts to be imported in any sort of quantities.
Hillel Gelva may have found the answer. Deep below the street level of contemporary Jerusalem, he's excavated the preserved ruins of a rich person's house. The walls and ceilings are covered with intricate designs. And these designs show that Jerusalem's builders had the skill to sculpt plaster and create the illusion of stone. This wall has been cut to mimic the framed blocks that make up the walls of the Temple Mount.
This is imitation in plaster of construction in large blocks. Each block have a frame, and here it was left white, not decorated, but other examples are with decoration.
It seems possible, then, that the sanctuary's awe-inspiring facade was created using a very cunning technique.
So in my opinion, when our sources describe the temple as being made of marble or covered with marble, what they actually mean is that the building was made of a shining white stone, or perhaps stone covered with a polished stucco.
We can now show the temple as it would have looked when Jesus saw it. The focal point of the city, white and gold, with plumes of smoke rising from the sacrificial altars that stood in front of it. The building was a magnet for believers all over the Middle East. When Jesus came to Jerusalem for his last Passover, there may have been 250,000 other visitors there. Jerusalem struggled to cope. And while the pilgrims concerned themselves with spiritual matters, the daily life of this desert city was dictated by something much more basic: the need for water. Tradition has it that 1 week before his death, Jesus entered the city of Jerusalem in triumph. Crowds gathered to welcome him, chanting and waving palms. Many of the people were his followers, but the city was already full of people come to celebrate the feast of Passover.
The normal population of Jerusalem around the time of Jesus is probably well under 30,000. And probably during the time of the festival, certainly the Passover festival, one can imagine that it might have been 10 times that. It might have been 300,000.
Jerusalem at this moment was the fastest growing settlement in the Middle East. It received over 1 million visitors a year. Our investigators have been trying to build a picture of what the city looked like and how it handled this massive influx of people. Some of the benefits seemed positive. Pilgrims brought wealth.
The construction of the temple itself engendered or created a lot of money. People came to Jerusalem as pilgrims. They had to spend money for lodging, for food, for gifts and souvenirs along the way, and of course pay the temple tax and also pay for sacrifices.
Decades of deep excavation along the western wall of the temple have uncovered the remains of a street 30 feet wide and 3,000 feet long, which functioned as a shopping mall. It's known as the Herodian Street. Jesus would have walked here.
This is the main street, the main thoroughfare of Jerusalem. And you have just to imagine the large number of people coming here to buy and sell things in this various shops along the street, or those who came on pilgrimage. This is the heart of Jerusalem.
Some archaeologists call this place Wall Street, acknowledging that it's the financial heart of the city. They have also pieced together physical evidence of the close relationship between these commercial interests and the spiritual life of the temple. Examination of the wall at the southern end of the street reveals the remains of an arch. It's known as Robinson's Arch. More than 50 feet tall and with a span of at least 40 feet, it served as one of the main entrances to the temple complex. And built into its base, against the walls of the Temple Mount, were stores that would sell goods to pilgrims.
That area, the area below it leading down to the great stairs that leave behind what is called Robinson's Arch, all of that, one can imagine, just overflowing with commerce. And all of these people, after all, they're heading up to the temple, and meanwhile, all along the way, there are hawkers saying, buy this, buy that.
Jesus must have encountered a scene like this as he entered the temple. Furious at what he saw, he set out to confront the authorities for the first time. It's said that he makes his way into the area called the Court of the Gentiles. Like every Jewish male, he had to pay a 2-shekel temple tax. The special coin needed could only be bought from the money changers in the temple complex. They had a reputation for corruption.
I can imagine that, changing money might lead to fraud, to taking advantage of innocent people from the countryside, etc., who are not used to city life. And he probably was standing aside and looked and watched those people cheating occasionally, and this made him mad.
This is the one occasion in the Gospels when Jesus is said to have shown his rage.
It's going too far within the temple precincts as far as Jesus is concerned. Get out of here.
He made a whip and threw them out, turned round the tables and said, what you're doing, you are converting my father's house into a cave of robbers.
But if pilgrims gave the city its income, they also had to be provided for. And the most valuable resource in Jerusalem was water. Jerusalem was and is a desert city. It stands 2,500 feet above sea level. The nearest river is 25 miles away.
How do all those thousands upon thousands of people in Jerusalem get their drinking water?
There were 30 rain-filled reservoirs around the city. The largest held a volume of water equivalent to 20 Olympic swimming pools, and yet supply could barely meet demand.
They must have crowded around them. They must have waited around them for their turn, because there weren't that many, and there were many pilgrims.
People didn't only need water for domestic purposes.
They need an inordinate amount of water for purification purposes. They need to be ritually pure to go up to the temple and visit it.
As part of daily religious observance, and particularly before going to the temple, every Jew was required to cleanse himself ritually by washing in what was called living water. Jerusalem had many pools designed for this purpose, called mikvahs. It was at the biggest and busiest of these, the Pool of Siloam, where Jesus is said to have performed one of his final miracles.
In the Gospel of John, we hear of the story of him healing the blind man. He takes some dirt from the ground, spits on it, smears it on his eyes, and says, now go and wash in the pool of Siloam.
It was a chance discovery during engineering work on a nearby pipe that led Ronnie Reich to pinpoint the precise location of this pool and understand just how large the Siloam pool was. Fed by one of Jerusalem's only natural springs via a tunnel 600 yards long, it's thought to have covered up to 20,000 square feet. If Jesus did heal a blind man who came and bore witness here, then the story of this apparent miracle would have been heard by hundreds and then spread throughout Jerusalem. It was a public challenge to the city's authorities. As investigators, archaeologists, and biblical scholars try to understand the unique metropolis that was Jerusalem in the time of Jesus, an extraordinary picture is emerging. This is a desert city obsessed by water, where spiritual matters govern every aspect of daily life, where practical, innovative engineering sits side by side with mysticism, where in the run-up to big religious festivals, crowds would gather at key points in the city. Shimon Gibson has been part of the team trying to uncover and recreate the most intriguing such site, the Bethesda Pool. Lying to the north of the temple complex, it is at this pool that, according to the Gospel of John, Jesus told a paralyzed man to take up his bed and walk. Archaeologists have dug down 40 feet through 2,000 years of rubble to uncover the place as Jesus would have seen it. What's fascinating is that even before he came here, this pool was said to have healing powers.
Jesus comes to the Bethesda pool, and there is a whole lineup of elderly people, of crippled people, of blinded people, and they're waiting essentially to get their turn in the pool.
The man who Jesus cured is said to have waited years for a chance to bathe in the waters here. And what Shimon Gibson discovers fits the story.
The steps from the time of Jesus are very well preserved. As you can see, there's a flight of steps here with a landing between each set of steps. These landings fit in very well with the Gospel of John's story, that the infirm were brought in to the pool itself and that Jesus then enacted his miracles.
The reason that the sick were carried here to rest on the landings and bathe in the waters was that the waters were said to bubble and churn red with blood. Shimon Gibson investigates the hidden system of tunnels and shafts which regulated the flow of water into the pool of Bethesda. This was what produced the pool's famous bubbling.
This is the area of the sluice gates, and you have two openings, one larger one at top, another smaller one at the bottom.
The sluice gates gave precise control over the depth of water in the pool. They were accessed via a vertical shaft sunk through 50 feet of rock.
If I can, let's see, here we are. So to demonstrate how people would have climbed up and down this shaft, I'm climbing up here, and it's roughly about this level that a pulley system would have been utilized. They would then extract the plug. It was hard work, but it was an ingenious system.
Shimon has also found an explanation for the apparent presence of blood in the water.
Here in this rock-cut wall, you can see here this fissure. And within the fissure is this reddish soil. Within the barrier wall, within a tunnel which was cut through between the two pools, the soil is even redder. When the water was flying through from the northern pool, those who were coming down to be purified would have thought that perhaps blood was emerging from the water.
At the same time, the Temple Mount was often awash with real blood. Because once a pilgrim had made himself ritually pure, his next duty would be to go and offer a beast for sacrifice. At the time of major festivals, such as the Passover, which brought Jesus to the city for the final days of his life, vast numbers of animals would be killed every hour. It was sacrifice on an almost industrial scale.
At Easter, Pesach, just imagine several thousands of sheep being slaughtered on a single day.
This is the background to Jesus' last days. We have a clear picture of what Jerusalem was like at the time that he was arrested, tried, and killed. But many people want to try and get closer still, to pinpoint the places where these events are said to have played out. It's not just historians and archaeologists. Every year, hundreds of thousands of pilgrims come to the city in the hope of walking where Jesus walked. But through 2,000 years of rebuilding and change, the city has grown, and so have the stories. It's become hard to separate reality from myth. A clear example is the site where Jesus ate his Passover meal. The way in which he is said to have broken bread here has formed a blueprint for Christian services ever since. And that's why so many come to this room, the Senecal, or upper room on Mount Zion, because they believe that it happened here.
The architecture of the room that is today identified as the site of the Last Supper is clearly much later than the time of Jesus. The arches, or the vaults of the room, which are ribbed, are distinctively Crusader in style.
And that's an architecture that won't come along for another 1,000 years after the time of Jesus.
These vaulted ceilings belong to the 12th century, when crusading European armies were battling Muslim forces for control of the Holy Land.
We have no archaeological evidence that the Last Supper took place in this room or even on the site where the room is located. It's just a tradition that has come to identify this spot as the site of the Last Supper.
This site was the location of one of the earliest Christian churches, but there's also been a mosque and a host of other buildings here. It's likely the Last Supper was in one of Jerusalem's private houses. It would have looked completely different than the church.
Because it would have been in a simple house. The roofing would have simply been flat wooden beams covering the ceiling, and nothing like the arches and vaults that you see today.
The Gospels say after the Last Supper, Jesus went with 3 of his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. Again, it's difficult to ascertain the precise location, but it's clear that this was at the foot of what is now called the Mount of Olives. Gethsemane means olive press.
Well, the Garden of Gethsemane seems to be a small enclosure up towards what we now call the Mount of Olives, northeast of the Temple Mount, northeast of the city. And that seems to be the place out to which Jesus went to pray on the night before he was captured.
After a night spent in meditation, he is seized by men acting for the temple authorities.
Jesus is apparently apprehended in the Garden of Gethsemane just before dawn, that darkest hour before the dawn. And the question is, where is he taken?
This is the final challenge for investigators, to map the sequence of events known as the Passion of Christ. 2,000 years on, they will try to retrace the path that led to Jesus' crucifixion. The Gospels agree that after his arrest, Jesus was brought to the residence of Pontius Pilate, Judea's Roman governor. This makes historical sense. The Roman Empire had a tight grip on this city. A big political decision, such as the execution of an apparent rebel or revolutionary like Jesus, had to be made by Rome's representative. Again, tradition has attached itself to one particular site as the place where Jesus was beaten, paraded before the mob, and then sentenced. Generations of pilgrims have been told that it happened at the Antonia fortress. The Antonia was the headquarters for the garrison of Roman soldiers stationed in Jerusalem. Very little remains of it now, but investigators have been able to reconstruct it from ancient writings. Situated at the northeast corner of the temple, it was a block-shaped structure with 4 massive towers, each well over 50 feet high. As such a strong image of Roman domination, it's clear why the Antonia came to be associated with Pilate and the trial of Jesus. Today, almost nothing of it remains. Looking for hard evidence, Jody Magnus heads to a paved area identified as the Lithostratus, supposedly attached to the fortress and the place where Jesus was crowned with thorns.
The Lithostratus is mentioned in the Gospels as the site where Jesus was sentenced to death by Pontius Pilate, and so modern Christian pilgrims to Jerusalem revere this site.
The problem is that the science just doesn't support this part of the traditional story.
In fact, we know from archaeology that this pavement didn't exist in the time of Jesus. It was laid later in the 2nd century AD by the Emperor Hadrian as part of a marketplace that he built here.
For centuries now, pilgrims have walked a route beginning at the Antonia, down which Jesus is said to have carried his cross. This route is called the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows.
By tradition now, we have adopted 14 stations where people stop to remember what Jesus has suffered.
But there is little to prove that this is the right route.
People who believe they are following the footsteps of Jesus to the point and place where he is confronted by Pontius Pilate, where the soldiers hold him in captivity, where they jam the crown of thorns on his head, may be mistaken.
The idea that this is the route that Jesus took is based on a simple misconception, that Pilate's residence and the headquarters of his troops were the same place. Actually, records suggest that Pilate probably lived in another building, a palace constructed by Herod.
We now know that contrary to medieval tradition, the trial of Jesus would have taken place within the old palace of Herod the Great, the Praetorium, where the governor Pontius Pilate, coming up from Caesarea, would have been lodged.
No trace of this palace has been found, but we do know that it stood to the southwest of the temple. And if this was Pilate's residence and Jesus was brought here, then his final journey did not follow the Via Dolorosa. Modern Jerusalem is not the city that Jesus knew, and it is almost impossible that anyone could now walk the exact path that Jesus took. For most of the people here, it's the spiritual dimension to this journey that's important. And yet, remarkably, there is strong evidence to suggest that we do know where Jesus was killed and buried. Scripture talks about Golgotha, the place of the skulls, as the place where Jesus died. Today, as they have done for 1,500 years, believers say that place was here, where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands in the center of Jerusalem. It is thought that this place only became a church 300 years after the death of Jesus. But some scholars have argued that it couldn't be the true site of Jesus' death and burial, because the Gospel says that these events took place outside the city walls, since Jewish law forbade either execution or burial inside the city.
In the case of Jerusalem, the configuration of the city was different then, and that the site of Golgotha was outside the city at the time of Jesus, but subsequently, of course, it's within the bounds of the city.
What we do know based on archaeological excavations is that the area of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, in particular the rotunda, was part of a larger cemetery. In other words, this was an area that was beyond the city walls. It was not within the city.
At a spot on the edge of the church, Jody Magnus finds proof that burials did take place on this site 2,000 years ago.
What we see here is an example of a typical Jewish tomb in Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. These tombs were typically rock-cut tombs with burial niches or loculi cut into the walls of the burial chambers.
All the facts fit. The weight of the evidence suggests that this really might be where the burial took place.
The location of Jewish tombs on this spot is as close as we can get archaeologically to saying that this is the authentic spot where Jesus was crucified and buried.
Jerusalem is an extraordinary city today, and we can reconstruct a detailed picture of what it was like 2,000 years ago.
We're capable of reconstructing first century Jerusalem physically and spiritually. Some of those remains we have to dig up. They're hidden underneath the soil, but others are there. They're still a central part of the city of Jerusalem.
By rebuilding it, we get a glimpse of a time and a life that, whatever we believe, played a massive part in shaping our world.
Yesus itu Tuhan.
were fully submerged by water for most of the year. In 1960, under the direction of President Nasser, work began on the second Aswan Dam. The new project constituted a further threat to Philae, which would now be stranded between two dams. Plans of how to save the site were discussed, and the chosen solution was similar to that which had been employed at Abu Simbel a few years earlier, dismantling the ruins and reconstructing them on a site about 300 meters away, Aigikia Island. In the ancient town of Philae, there was a temple dedicated to Isis. Its construction was begun by Nectanebo I, one of the first Egyptian pharaohs, and finished by the Romans. The temple was dedicated to the cult of the goddess and attended by the Nubian community until the mid-6th century, when Emperor Justinian ordered it to be transformed into a Coptic church.
Primarily within the kingdom of Armenia, a buffer state which the Romans and Parthians were constantly vying for influence within. Cleopatra briefly campaigned with him as far as the eastern Roman border in 36 BC, before returning to Egypt to give birth to their youngest child. As all of this was occurring, there were also growing tensions between Octavian and Antony concerning his relationship with Cleopatra and the public nature of it, even as Antony's wife, Octavian's sister Octavia, was in the eastern Mediterranean and was starting to raise her two daughters with Antony. As Cleopatra and Antony became lovers, and then the main power in the eastern provinces of what remained of the Roman Republic, all manner of stories began to attach themselves to them. Antony was rumored to be what we would now term an alcoholic, and it was even claimed that he had written a book exclusively on alcohol and drinking. This and many other stories were symbolic of the alleged debauchery and excess of their court in Alexandria. Perhaps the most famous tale about this centers on a wager between the pair as to which one of them could hold the most magnificent banquet. Cleopatra won the bet. Stories of it included a version in Pliny the Elder's huge encyclopedia of knowledge, written a century later, the Natural History, in which he presented a tale about Cleopatra dissolving pearls in her wine and drinking them. Pliny explains it as follows: there have been two pearls that were the largest in the whole of history. Both were owned by Cleopatra. In accordance with previous instructions, the servants placed in front of her only a single vessel containing vinegar, the strong, rough quality of which can melt pearls. She was at the moment wearing in her ears that remarkable and truly unique work of nature. Antony was full of curiosity to see what in the world she was going to do. She took one earring off and dropped the pearl in the vinegar, and when it was melted, swallowed it. It was a sign of how Cleopatra and Antony were being perceived by the Roman world in their own time, that fanciful stories like this were still circulating a century later. Incidentally, the story of the pearl would become